Hello, students, and welcome back to another exciting installment of the Introduction of Psychology. And I say that sounding a bit sarcastic, if not facetious, but in fact, I do find almost every single aspect of this field to be exciting, whether it's intro or some more advanced research stuff. And memory is one of my most interesting areas, I feel. Because remember, last time we were talking about learning and conditioning and cognition. Well, you don't acquire any of that stuff if there's no memory, because it's memory that the process of learning, where does it go? It dumps into our memory. We have many different kinds of memory, and just like in all of the other topics, we could spend hours, days, weeks, years, lifetimes even discussing memory, human and otherwise. So, first of all, let's break it down. There are, according to the Atkinson-Shiffrin model of memory, and it has demonstrated to be at least the optimal working construct for now for memory. So we're going to stick with this Atkinson-Shiffrin model. What is memory? What is it? It's an active. It's active. It's not passive. It's active, and it receives, stores, organizes, alters, and recovers information. Your memory does all of that. It just doesn't store. It receives, it organizes, it changes, it alters. You didn't know that. Yeah, your memories are altered, and you'll see more of that also in a couple of the other videos that I have there for you. And it recovers information. So the three-stage model, the R, is a sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. Okay, sensory memory, long-term memory, short-term memory. So with this little path diagram down here, we say here's input stimulus, and it can be any of the senses that we have discussed so far: smell, touch, hear, taste, vision. Any of these go into a sensory register. That's where they are first encountered. And that register says, do we really want this at all? Does this really, and sends it out. It's just gone. Okay, so you're not aware of most of the things that your sensory systems encounter in the environment. At that point now, your brain says, let's pay attention to this. And then at some point you say, okay, as you pay attention to it, it now goes into a short-term memory. Okay, maybe this is important. Let's spend a little more time on this. It goes in short-term memory. Now, that may be a short-term memory that you rehearse, like a phone number. I got to remember this number. Or it may be something that you're not necessarily rehearsing, but if you don't rehearse it, then it also goes to the vapor. In other words, you forget it. Or it's output, like you dial the number. However, as you can see there, the arrows now here on the right side of the screen, if you don't rehearse that which is in short-term memory, it will not go into the next stage, long-term memory. Also, when you need information, like let's say you remember somebody's address and zip code and everything else, then you retrieve that information. Or let's say somebody says, hey, what was that actress's name who was in that movie? And you think about it, you bring it out of retrieval and out of long-term memory, and there's the name. And then it goes back. In short-term memory, stays there for a while, then goes back in the long-term. So those are the basic three stages of memory. The process of memory, that is what happens and how it happens. Remember, we've already talked about sensory encoding and decoding, and what's involved with the different energy systems in order to have in order to change one form of energy into another form of energy. In memory, the key processes are encoding, and that is converting information into a usable form; storage, holding this information in memory for later use; and retrieval, taking memories out of storage. So again, now let's look at the basic memory processes, and these processes are going on all the time. Encoding. Now, that's what type of memory codes go on there? Is it acoustic, that is sound; visual; semantic, meaning? Semantic means meaning. And in fact, our memory, and we'll talk about this later, our memory responds best to things that have meaning. We'll, again, go into that later. So encoding, storage, and under storage we have different types of memory: episodic long-term memory, procedural long-term memory, and semantic long-term memory. Then retrieval, or in other words, recovering from that memory. What are the types of retrieval? Recall and recognition. For example, if I were to ask, say, name the 5 general senses, then you'd say that's recall. But if I gave you a multiple choice exam and I said which of these is a sense, and then I had on there combing my hair, doing the dishes, vision, and walking across, then you choose it. So and that's called recognition. So let's talk about the first type of memory, and this is a type of memory you may not have even heard of before. And that is sensory memory, sometimes called iconic memory. Sensory memory stores an exact copy of incoming information for a few seconds or less, sometimes just, and I mean less than a second. So it's either what's seen or what's heard, and this is the first stage of memory. It impacts basically like a filter, and it's not a filter, but let's just visualize it as a filter. And at that point says, oh, now this is just going to stay on the screen for a second or less, and then it's gone. We're normally unaware of sensory memory. You're not aware of it. We are not aware of sensory memory normally. And selective attention to sensory memory transfers information short-term memory. So most of what hits sensory memory is gone. It's forgotten. You're not even aware of it. However, selective attention, another process of our brain, selective attention then transfers the information from short-term memory, if in fact that which is a sensory memory is worth our attention. So sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch all go into receptors, go into sensory memory, and then go off into initial processing. However, most of that, and I'd say like 99.9% of it, is not transferred to the next stage, and therefore it's forgotten. If one remembered absolutely every single second, every single incident, every single thing that occurred every second of the day, I don't know if we'd run out of room, but certainly the person couldn't survive. You couldn't survive with that condition. One must attend to those stimuli that are most conducive to survival. So what are the types of sensory memory? Okay, and I mentioned iconic memory, and this is visual sensory memory, and it's stored for about a half a second, 500 milliseconds. There's echoic memory, and this is after a sound is heard. There's a brief continuation of the activity of the auditory system for about 2 seconds. You may probably have experienced that. So sensory memories, it's a duration of a sensory memory, and it varies for the different types of senses. So for vision, about a half a second. For audition or hearing is echoic memory. That's echoic memory, and that may last as long as 3 or 4 seconds. And then there's something called hepatic memory, and that is less than a second long also. A hepatic memory is the memory that is tactile or touch type memory. Moving on to short-term memory, STM, short-term memory. It stores very small amounts of information for maybe a dozen seconds, 12 seconds or so. We are very consciously aware now of short-term memory. Now remember, you're not consciously aware of sensory memories, but as soon as sensory memory transfers that which needs to be attended to into short-term, now we're consciously aware of it. Encoding of short-term memory is usually phonetic, or in other words, by sound. And also short-term memory is very, very sensitive to interruption or interference. You ever try to remember a number or sequence or something like that, and you've got somebody messing with you, giving you numbers or whatever on the next to you, or maybe there's a radio or TV going off in the background, and you're trying to focus on not being interrupted because you need to remember something. So short-term memory, very sensitive to interference. And there's another part, aspect of memory here called working memory. And a working memory is a part of short-term memory, but it's more like a sketch pad. And what we do is we can recover from something from short-term memory and bring it into that working memory, into that sketch pad, process or do whatever we're going to the information, and then put it back. Now, the thing is that when memories are accessed, recalled, and then restored, they are sometimes altered as well. So memory systems become altered. Okay, now you see also on the graphic here, I've got sensory memory going into short-term memory going back and forth into long-term memory, and both short-term and long-term memory going into working memory. And then you see that the double arrows going back and forth, that interaction between working memory and reasoning. Because it is through that working memory that we bring issues, topics, subjects into our what we call our executive systems, in order to reason, use logic, language, calculation, and so on. And then moving on to long-term memory. Long-term memory is storing meaningful, I don't know, some long-term things that one remembers, I know I remember, may not be meaningful at all. I remember, but I wish I could forget them. But storing meaningful information relatively permanently, and encoding a long-term memory is usually based again upon meaning, semantics. Okay, so now look at what's going on here. Now we've got sensory memory, attention now going to short-term memory, back and forth, encoding, retrieval into long-term memory. And under long-term memory, what do we have? We have two different general groupings of long-term memory called explicit and implicit memories. Explicit memories are also called declarative memories. We're conscious of them, and they are either episodic or semantic. Episodic memories are, do you remember what you did on your 12th birthday? Or would you have for lunch yesterday? Episodic memories. Or who was Abraham Lincoln? Episodic memory. Semantic memories, well, that's also who was Abraham Lincoln. Semantic memories are facts, information. What's the capital of California? But episodic memories, more of an event and more autobiographical, although they also reflect events in your life, and we're going to talk about specific about events and how our memories, especially episodic memory, is not a tape recorder or a video camera. We are not machines that record and replay exact duplicates. We don't do that. It doesn't work like that. So semantic memories, facts, and like who was Abraham Lincoln, and when was the Magna Carta signed, and so on and so forth. Facts. Implicit memories are called non-declarative memories. They're unconscious to you. They're procedural memories, like uh, how do you brush your teeth? How do you turn on a light bulb even, or light? Now, they're skills that we don't even think about, but we learned them, and and when we learned them, they got transferred to procedural memory. You know it. It's second nature. It is your nature. So we have both explicit and implicit types of memory: conscious and unconscious, declarative, non-declarative. What is our capacity now for short-term memory? In other words, once you commit, let's say, a number to short-term memory, how long does that information stay? How can we count on that information staying there if you don't rehearse it? So the capacity of short-term memory is sort of limited to what I say there is a magic number, and that's 7 plus or minus 2. You ever notice that a basic phone number is 7? 1, 2, 3 dash 4, 5, 6, 7. So I mean the telephone number in and of itself, the basic number without the area code, there is 7 digits. So what is an information bit? It is a meaningful single piece of information. An information bit is, we're not talking about computers here. A single piece of information like a number or a letter, like ABC. So there's 3 bits of an ABC. A digit span is a test of attention and short-term memory, or a string of numbers is recalled and forward, backwards. Now, digit span, in fact, is one of the 10 basic tests on what's called the WAIS or the WISC. The WAIS is the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, and in that, the WISC is the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for children. So in both, there's something called the digit span. I know certainly in the WAIS, there's a digit span, and what you're given are a series of numbers. So you start with 2 numbers, and 3 numbers, and 4 numbers, and 5, and so on. Then, as you remember those numbers forward, then you're given another set of numbers and said, now recall them backwards. So percentage of those who recall consonants. Consonants like C, B, F, H, G, J, and so on. So these are percentage who called, these are sort of like nonsense consonants. Because in order to test just basic memory, we need something that is neutral, something that has no basis in any kind of meaning. Because as soon as something has a basis in meaning, it takes on or acquires memory in and of itself. That's why when we do try to remember something, we try to incorporate things called mnemonics, or in other words, procedures that help us remember. Maybe try to associate something that you're remembering to something that's funny, or anything that has any kind of a meaning to it. As you can see on the graph here, percentage of individuals who recall the consonants after 0 seconds, about 90%. And then when we go out to 18 seconds, fewer than 10%. Chunking is a term that we use also in memory research and short-term memory. Chunking is a form of recoding. It's reorganizing or modifying information to assist storage in memory. Because when we chunk, we take similar pieces and put them together. So information chunks are bits of information that are grouped into larger units. So, for example, let's say you went out and you need to go to the grocery store. You got a grocery list, but you forgot it, and you don't want to go back and get it. How do you do that? Well, you remember what you could do is chunk your grocery list. So there on the right side, you see there's 9 items that you had on your grocery list. I forgot it. What am I going to do? Well, I knew that I had to do produce. What's in produce? Tomatoes. Yeah, we need tomatoes. Cucumbers. Yep. Strawberries. Yep. Okay. Deli. What's in there? Same thing. Dairy. What's in there? So by simply chunking or using categories, I could take the details of the list that I forgot and still bring those into something that I could remember. So by rehearsal and short-term memory, what do we mean by rehearsal? I'm sure you've all done this before. You repeat, you repeat, you repeat, you repeat, you repeat, and you have somebody maybe even helping you repeat to memorize what you've got to memorize. But maintenance rehearsal is repeating information silently to prolong its presence in short-term memory. Remember that the storage is brief without maintenance rehearsal. Rote rehearsal is the use of repetition to transfer information into long-term memory. This is not very effective. It isn't very effective at all. And there's a video there that you may see later that is that very same point. Elaborative processing is linking new information with existing memories and knowledge into long-term memory. And this is a much more effective way to transfer information into long-term memory. But we aren't, we certainly are not storage disks or hard drives or even flash drives or thumb drives. We do not store information like that. We do not reproduce perfect copies of it at all. Again, considering storage in long-term memory. Long-term memories are only rarely permanent, only very rarely permanent. But as we talked on this last slide, I showed you about using elaborative processing to link new information to existing memories. So elaborative processing can revise memories on the basis of reasoning or adding new, remember this, possibly false information. So we are active elaborative processors. We as humans are active elaborative processors, and we revise our memories, sometimes unconsciously, sometimes consciously, on the basis of reasoning, on the basis of new information that we bring in and that we see, especially if it has very high emotional content, by adding many times false information to memories. Pseudo-memories are false memories that a person believes are true or accurate. Source confusion occurs when the origins of the memory are misremembered. And remember that my memories, your memories, whatever, and we believe that our memories are absolutely rock solid correct, especially when there's high emotional content or association with those set of memories, or perhaps it's something that in one's family or one's culture, there's constant repetition to that set of memories or to that set of topics. Distortion and reconstruction of memories is a very important process here going on with long-term memories. It means that sometimes our memories are not 100% accurate. In fact, most of the time, they're not completely 100% accurate. And that we reconstruct memories. We forget. Forgetting involves not only ineffective coding, but also a retrieval failure. Memories decay. And also, there is a process that is out of our awareness called repression. And in some cases, memories aren't forgotten, but they don't really serve us that well to remember us, or the memory may cause anxiety that we don't want to deal with, and so they become repressed. They get like put in a vault and closed. And that is a metaphor. There's no vault. There's no system of closure in our brains. Neurons don't work like that. But again, that's a metaphor. So about the retrieval, how do we recall our memories from long-term memory? What is that process called? And there are several hypotheses and theories regarding retrieval from long-term memory. The so-called network model is that long-term memories are stored as a network of linked ideas. This is probably one of the best models for how our long-term memory and retrieval from long-term memory works. Red integration are memories that are reconstructed or expanded by starting with one memory and then following the network or links to related memories. I'll tell you an example of red integration. Many of us have had this experience. I know I have. You're walking down a street. I remember not long ago I was walking down Chestnut in San Francisco, and I walked by a bakery. And this particular bakery is called the Chestnut Bakery. They're not there anymore. And the whiff from there, they must have been baking or cooking something, but it instantly reminded me of being a child, like maybe 10, 11 years old, I remember, at my grandmother's house on Thanksgiving. And the entire network of memories came about from that simple sensory experience. Now, am I sure that those memories were correct about my child being at grandma's house on Thanksgiving whenever those were recalled? I'm not sure. Probably half of them are wrong. I've seen so many movies about families on Thanksgiving that those probably got intruded and changed around. I don't know. Maybe there were some negative things in there that I didn't want to remember and they got repressed. I have no idea. All I know is that I have a memory about grandma's house when I was 11 years old on Thanksgiving and everyone there who's involved, and I can recall what we did, but it may or may not be accurate. What we call a cognitive interview is the use of various cues and strategies to improve eyewitness memory. And this is we're walking on eggshells when we do something like this, because if you use cues and strategies to improve someone else's memory, it's therefore easy for you to cause them to remember in the way you want them to remember. So again, and I could go into a lot of detail here about cases where cognitive interviews and pseudo memories were implanted, particularly in children, in order to recall abuses that in fact didn't exist. So I put here July 2017, our web of memories. A technical revolution reveals how our brain links memories and shapes our experience of the world. And the article here as well. You can certainly find this and read it at your leisure. So what are other types? What are some of the types of long-term memory? We've talked about how they're retrieved and how we remember them, how they get in there, basically through linking them memories through meaning. But types of long-term memories, for example, procedural memories. This is long-term memory for conditioned responses and learned skills. These are skills. Declarative memory is fact memory. It's a long-term memory for factual information. And a lot of declarative memory is what one hopes you are exercising for this course. Long-term memory for factual information. However, under that, there are two types of memory. Under declarative memory, there's semantic memory, and that's a part of declarative memory for impersonal facts and everyday knowledge. Semantic memory, impersonal facts and everyday knowledge. And episodic memory, and that's part of declarative memory for personal experiences, autobiographical memory. So let's look at this pie chart now of the types of long-term memory. On one side, on the left side, we have declarative memories, and on the other side, non-declarative. Now remember, on declarative memories, those are memories you're conscious of. Non-declarative memories are memories you are not conscious of. What it shows here also are parts of your brain where these memories are associated. Doesn't necessarily mean that's the only place, but largely. On the declarative side, we have episodic memories, and that's your autobiography. Episodic memories. And you can see also it shows the part of the brain that's part of the brain for declarative memory that shows the limbic system. and that is also true of semantic memories, and that is like, what's the capital of Maine? What's the capital of California? And so on. Your entire surface of your cerebrum is suggested with priming, and that is the power of suggestion. On the non-declarative side, we have procedural skills, like how do you swing a golf club? How do you hold the proper stance to ski in certain types of snow and things like that? Procedural skills can get better and better and better and better and better with rehearsal. And as you can see here, the structure here is the cerebellum. Now notice over here under the declarative side, no cerebellum. Over here, cerebellum. So procedural skills, that's largely motor, especially fine motor memories and fine motor skills, as well as this, what's called the associative cortex. And then in here, we have also under non-declarative memories, classical conditioning. Remember we talked about that? You're not aware of it. If you smell something and you're hungry and all of a sudden your mouth starts to water, you didn't cause that to happen. It's classical conditioning. Then there's also fear memories. If you're fear of something, and this is something we run into in psychotherapy a lot. For example, let's say that we have trauma, PTSD is associated with fear memories. If it's too intense or too severe, it detracts from everything else in this individual's life because the memory supersedes everything else. Then also there's habituation and sensitization, I mean. So after a while, you're used to something or you sensitize to something. It's non-associative. You're not thinking about it. How can we measure memory? For example, what is a tip of the tongue state? What is that feeling? Who was that actor in that movie? I know you know what he looks like. You've got this picture in your brain, in that sketch pad I was telling you about. It's there, but you can't remember the name. And it's the feeling the memory is available, but not quite retrievable, and it's so frustrating. What is that? The feeling of knowing that allows people to predict beforehand whether or not they will be able to remember something. Let's say you look at something or you encounter, let's say this class, and you have a feeling. You may have a feeling of knowing, like you'll sail right through it because all the information clicks. It's called a feeling of knowing. Unfortunately, not enough people have that with very basic mathematics, and that is probably because of fear. So, measuring memory. How do we measure memory? And what is the tip of the tongue and feeling of knowing? So when we recall is a direct retrieval of facts or information. It's hardest to recall items in the middle of an ordered list, known as the serial position effect. This is an important effect, and it's not only in memory, but also even in personality impression. Or in other words, the first impression is always the most important. And in fact, in memory, the primacy effect says that we easily recall the first few items in a list because the opportunity to rehearse them increases the likelihood that they're transferred into long-term memory. But here in the middle, in the middle, these items are hardest to recall. they're presented too long ago to still be in short-term memory, and so many of the items so the distance from here back to short-term memory is longer than from here. Yet in recency, we easily recall items near the end of a list because they're still contained in short-term memory. So here we start rehearsing. Here we're too far away from the rest of the list that we didn't rehearse, and here we've caught up, and now the list is still being repeated. So there's a primacy and a recency effect, and like I said, this is also true in personality impression formation in seeing a list of positive or negative items about something or someone, and whether or not that positive or negative, how extreme each one is, will also determine a position effect or has a position effect. Now we talked about recall. How about recognition? So recognition is previously learned material that is correctly identified. Previously learned material correctly identified. You have to identify it now, not recall it. And it is usually superior to recall, especially multiple choice. Distractors are false items included with a correct item. And I do this in exams sometimes, because I'll put in a false item that seems like it might be right, but it's not. And it distracts the test taker. So these are wrong choices on multiple choice tests. A false positive is a false sense of recognition. Sometimes you feel, oh, yeah, I got this down pat, and you don't. You really don't. How about relearning stuff? Learning again something that was previously learned. We relearn faster and better than we learn. And we can use this to measure memory of prior learning. So in other words, if you have just as much time taking a problem, taking a course the second time as the first time, it may mean that you didn't learn it very well the first time, or it may mean something else. So there's this thing in this thing called the saving score, and that's the amount of time saved when relearning information. Back to implicit and explicit memories. Explicit memories are past experiences that are consciously brought to mind. Implicit memories are memories not known to exist. They're memories that are unconsciously retrieved. Priming is when cues are used to activate hidden memories. The idea of priming and hidden memories is still being researched to some degree. Some degree it's true, and some degree maybe not so true. But of the memory branches now in long-term memory, remember explicit memories and implicit memories with conscious recall, without conscious recall. Under explicit, semantic and episodic. Under implicit, procedural, and those are cognitive and motor and cognitive skills, like language and riding a bike. And priming, or is this enhanced identification of objects or words. So this guy here, you see Ebbinghaus, his contribution to our field was just that. He studied memory to an extent, but what he's more interested in is forgetting. How long does it take for us to forget anything, something? So as I mentioned earlier, the first thing you have to do in order to establish a baseline with memory and forgetting are to use neutral syllables or nonsense, neutral consonants or nonsense syllables, that is, that have no real meaning or connection to anything. But this long-term forgetting memory, this curve of forgetting, this Ebbinghaus curve, is a graph that shows the current amount of memory information after a period of time. And these graphs are done with large numbers of people. So these are all means, actually. These are all means. We generally can retain that much information after 20 minutes and so on. But these are nonsense syllables or meaningless three-letter words that test learning and forgetting. Encoding failure in long-term memory is when a memory was never fully formed in the first place. You've got to form the memory, and before the memory is formed, remember I told you that meaning is most important to us for remembering something. So if you're going to remember anything, it has to have meaning. Not necessarily relative to how you're going to apply it in whatever, but meaning relative to the life or to you in general. But forgetting as an encoding failure means that it never really was formed in the first place. So, other ways that we have storage failures in long-term memory. So we have what are called memory traces, and these are physical changes in nerve cells or brain activity that occur when memories are stored. I wanted to comment here, whenever you experience, learn, or anything, you change. I change, you change, everyone changes. How? Well, you can't see it necessarily in your face, or you can't necessarily measure it in your temperature or your pulse rate, but it changes on a microscopic neurological level. There is a change. You change. Memory decay is when memory traces become weaker or fading, or weakening of these memories. And disuse, this is theoretical, and that memory traces weaken when memories are not periodically used or retrieved. Certainly that is seemingly true, and that is memory traces do tend to weaken. But then what is that actual process? What is that neurochemical and biochemical process, that molecular process within those neurons that causes that? That's something that we're interested in as well. Not this class, but in future research. So retrieval failure in long-term memory has to do with several things. First of all, is the memory available? So if the memory is available, if it's in long-term memory, is it available? Then is it accessible? Can it be successfully retrieved? Or maybe the information is available, but not accessible. It's there, but you can't get to it. In that case, we may need memory cues. Any simultaneous cue that's associated with a memory usually enhances retrieval of a memory. Now, a cue like that might be, I can remember that first, the actors, I could see that actor. Tell me, just give me the letter of his first name, and you say T, and oh yeah, okay, I remember Tom Cruise. That was it. See, so that type of cue can then bring that inaccessible memory back into retrieval. Then we have an issue that is called state-dependent learning. Now, state-dependent learning is when memory retrieval is influenced by your bodily state of time at the learning. So if you are, this is true in some cases and not of the others. So if your body state is in the same as the time of learning and at the time of retrieval, retrieval can be improved. And I will say if somebody has been drinking a ton of coffee, gallons of coffee that is, in order to study, and then at the time that individual goes to take the exam, it would be better if that individual got some rest first, then drank a whole bunch of coffee again to go take the exam, and not just get some rest and go take the exam, because their state when they were learning the information was under a coffee buzz. So the operations at encoding and the operations at retrieval, if they overlap, you're going to have a better success. That graph on the right says show up drunk to exam. Not necessarily true. I just put in there for humor. Okay, and we talked a bit about interference before. I remember I mentioned interference when we have when you're trying to commit information into your short-term memory, and then all of a sudden so you've got some other information coming in that interferes with that, numbers or something. uh, that can impair the process. So interference is a tendency for new memories to impair retrieval of older memories as well. But now remember, that interference initially we were talking about short-term memory. Now we're talking about long-term memory. So tendency of new memories to impair the retrieval of older memories, and also the reverse happens. So there's two types of interference in this case. We have proactive interference where let's say you've learned a combination to your high school or your locker, your gym locker or whatever. So you have now you've learned the combination of the school locker. So then you go to another locker, but the memory of your old locker combination interferes with the recall of your new locker combination. Of course, you can apply this to almost anything you're trying to remember. Retroactive occurrence occurs when knowledge of a new email address interferes with recall of an old address. So you've learned your sibling's new college email address. Then the knowledge of the new email address interferes with recall of the old email address. So now the same address may be different. Transfer of training, and again, this sort of goes along with interference as well, but it can be in a constructive manner. And that's positive transfer is a master of one task aids in learning or performing another. So that's positive transfer. That is like a positive interference. Negative transfer is a master of one task conflicts with learning or performing another. And that's why you really shouldn't, especially when it comes to practicing techniques that you're trying to get better and better at, to not do that unless you do it with the exact correct form. So you need a coach or you need a teacher. Let's say you're learning how to play an instrument or something. Don't learn to do things incorrectly, because then when it comes time to do it correctly, you'll have more of a problem in getting out of the bad habits you got into. So that would be a negative transfer, learning something the wrong way. Now let's talk about repression and suppression. Repression is unconsciously, and I have a problem with that word because I want to know exactly what is occurring, not some magical id or ego pushing things out. I want to know what is the neuro and biochemical process is going on, and how are the brain substrates involved in interacting in pushing painful, embarrassing, or threatening memories out of your awareness. And we know that can be done. We know that's done. So this is sort of like motivated forgetting is really what it is. It's not magic. It's just motivated forgetting. Suppression is consciously putting something painful or threatening out of your mind, or trying to keep it from entering your awareness. I mean, if you had some terrible trauma occur to you in a certain city or town, you might leave that city or town just so you don't have the memories or the stimulation for the memories, the triggers coming into you. And in that case, you would have a suppression. So we have repression, which is really more of a motivated forgetting process. And then we have suppression, which is consciously putting something painful or threatening out of your mind. Okay, how do we form memories? How does the brain do that? How does it work? Terms. We've got to learn new terms here. Consolidation is the forming of a long-term memory in the brain. That is the technical term for it. The long-term memory is now, boom, it's there. What's that called? It's called consolidation. Retrograde amnesia is forgetting events that occurred before an injury or a trauma. Or in other words, let's say all of a sudden, boom, you have an accident. Your head hits the steering wheel. But you're still conscious. So somebody says, well, what happened? And all of a sudden you don't remember what happened. Or you might have anterograde amnesia, which might also, I think both cases would require a trip to the hospital. However, anterograde is forgetting events that follow an amnesia or trauma, especially if you've got that accident and all of a sudden you don't remember who you are, which would be anterograde amnesia. Electroconvulsive shock or ECS it has really gotten some bad press. I think that Hollywood was probably responsible for some of the bad press. Where you see people getting ECTs, or ECT is electroconvulsive treatment, and you see them bouncing around and flailing around all over the bed, and they've got they're strapped down, and that's not how it works. ECS is a mild electrical shock that's passed through the brain, and it can prevent consolidation of memories from being formed at a time. They can also deconsolidate memories, and that is something that we see in people who are very, very depressed and then undergo ECS. Yes, it works. They become less depressed. And part of that may be because whatever was depressing them are unconscious memories or memories out of awareness that are still spinning up highly evocative and negative feelings. And because of that, that the ECS may work. That is a hypothesis. It is my hypothesis. I've read it elsewhere. I believe it's true. It may not be true. As people do more and more research into this area, I am very eager to see the results. So let's talk about memory formation and the hippocampus. Now, the hippocampus is a part of your brain that's in your midbrain. It's below. It's down here. So you see hippocampus structure and the limbic system linked to explicit memory. So this is your hippocampus around in this area here, and it's well in the middle of your brain. And then your cerebellum is this little brain, that sometimes it's called, that's back here. So what do we know? A lot of things that we know about how we work, especially our brain, is really dependent upon somebody who gets injured, and then we say what doesn't work anymore. So the hippocampus is a brain structure, and it's associated with emotion and transfer of information passing from short-term memory into long-term memory. If it's damaged, the person can no longer create new long-term memories, and thus will always live in the present. So if you want a funny movie about that, but it doesn't really represent the reality, but it still sort of gets the idea across, is 50 First Dates with Adam Sandler in it, 50 First Dates. Memories prior to the damage will remain intact. So it's only after it's damaged that one would have problems to create new long-term memories. So damage to the hippocampus can result in the inability to form new explicit memories. But your ability to remember skills remains intact. Flashbulb memory is a memory created during times of personal tragedy, accident, or other emotionally significant events. And this occurs, this is a common symptom of people suffering from PTSD, is that they will have these flashbulb memories. So the flashbulb memories is a memory that evokes not just a description of it, but the full entourage of the memory, including the sounds, the fear, and all the other emotions that were experienced during that event, and probably even the sights of it, the smells, the sounds, and everything else. This flashbulb memory can really, depending upon the strength of it, can really bring you down. And these things, though, can include both positive and negative experiences. and there's a tremendous amount of confidence placed in them, even though they may very well be inaccurate. Or in other words, we put our own juice in our own memories, and that memory may or may not be accurate, or it may just be 50% accurate or 80% accurate, but it's probably largely inaccurate. And this is all due to the involvement of the limbic system. As you can see here, though, the limbic system includes those that I've got labeled there, plus more: the fornix, the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the amygdala, the mammillary bodies, and the hippocampus. Now, there's something called photographic or eidetic imagery, and eidetic imagery is like a photographic memory, and it's so that there's these persistent mental images or mental pictures. So eidetic imagery occurs when a person, usually a child, has visual images clear enough to be scanned or retained for at least 30 seconds. Remember that the iconic memory, visual sensory memory, disappears after about a half second. So now can you imagine having a eidetic imagery or a memory that lasts for at least 30 seconds, not a half second? So you can usually these memories usually disappear during adolescence, and it's rare by adulthood. How are ways that we can improve our memory? In other words, encoding strategies. And one way, and we've talked about this, is through elaborative processing. Look for connections to existing knowledge. Select only the most important concepts to memorize, and organize difficult items into chunks. Remember chunks now. And this is an excellent form of recoding. We also do what we call whole learning, and that's versus part learning, and that is study the largest meaningful amount of information that you can at one time. This is part of a progressive part method. So for a very long or complex material, break a learning task into a series of shorter sections. A serial position, as we talked about, is also very important. That is, since most errors occur while remembering the middle part of the list, spend more study time on the middle part. Use cues, stimuli that aid retrieval, best effective, used in encoding, and engage more in elaborative encoding to increase the number of available retrieval cues. There's something called overlearning, which is continuing to study beyond bare mastery, and that works, believe me. There's also spaced practice, and this is alternate short study sessions with brief rest periods, and this tends to be better for massed practice and studying for long periods without any rest periods. So studying for a long period of time without any rest period, it's probably not as good as having this spaced practice. And along with spaced practice also, you can incorporate something that we talked about in the last lesson, and that was the PREMAC principle, and that is to reward yourself for engaging in activities that are less likely to be performed. And then you reward yourself with an activity that is more likely to be performed, like anything you like. We can practice retrieval through recitation or feedback. Knowledge of results, obviously, it lets you check your progress. And recitation allows you to summarize aloud while you're learning, review, and use another strategy to aid your recall, and also extend how long you remember. So lengthen the amount of time between your retrieval practices. As we're staying into ways to improve your memory, the lack of sleep will decrease your retention time and ability to recall memory faster than anything else, as well as sleeping aids If you take sleeping pills, alcohol or any other drug also really messes up your memory. So lack of sleep decreases your retention. Taking any kind of substance that will also cause a lack of sleep will also decrease your retention. And being hungry decreases your retention. So don't take an exam unless you're well fed. Certainly not hungry. You can see here on the graph hours elapsed after learning syllables. And again, these are based simply upon syllables. If we had certain subject matter, then it would be biased. Some people would remember the subject matter better or less than other people because of the bias of the subject matter itself. So we use these nonsense syllables, and we see after staying awake, we get this the line of forgetting goes down a lot faster. And earlier was after a good night's sleep, it stays high pretty fast. Now, mnemonics, and I mentioned the term in mnemonics as I started this lecture, but a mnemonic is a memory trick. It's any kind of memory system or aid, and you can use in that mental pictures or anything that helps things makes things meaningful, or anything that makes your information more familiar, or you can even form bizarre, unusual, or exaggerated mental associations as long as it fits you for remembering. For example, here is a memory association for the symptoms of schizophrenia under the DSM-5, or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the 5th edition. So the criteria is greater than or equal to 2 out of 5 of these criteria. So this is DHS BIN. So you see delusion, hallucination, and this sounds like dustbin. So if you remember dustbin, only no T, so dustbin, and this H is sort of a U. So dustbin, delusion, hallucination, disorganized speech, disorganized catatonic behavior, and negative symptoms, which includes things like catatonic behavior and constricted affect. So schizophrenia has poor self-care. Sometimes they stink like a dustbin. Then there's something called the keyword method. This is also an aid to memory, and we use a familiar word or image to link to items. For example, vulture on a car. A car in French is la voiture. I don't speak French, so I may have said that incorrectly. But voiture sounds like vulture, and it's sitting on a car. So that's a mnemonic. We can also use mnemonics to remember things in order. So like a chain or story, remember lists in order, forming an exaggerated association connecting 1 to 2 and 2 and so on and so forth. It's an important thing to do, especially if you're trying to remember things in history, for example. Then there's also called the method of loci, and loci is take a mental walk. What are some of the items that you see on this mental walk of this path? Pick your favorite grocery store and start walking down aisles in your mind, and you will see certain objects there. So you can use that to systematize, or this method. Again, this is an example, but it is a method of using a system, a mental system to remember. And that's it for today, for now. So take care and